The judge's gavel echoed through the courtroom, silencing the murmurs of those present. The case was tense, a custody battle fraught with accusations and resentments, but no one expected it to take that turn. The moment the defense attorney began to speak, a boy's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. "You are my mother." The declaration came loaded with desperation, and each word seemed to carry the weight of a forgotten past. Carolina felt a chill run down her spine. Her gaze met the boy's, and something inside her twisted. Miguel. The name echoed in her mind before any confirmation. The boy trembled, his wide eyes pleading as if he was waiting for her to finally acknowledge what had always been there. The courtroom froze. The lawyers exchanged bewildered glances. The jurors held their breath. The judge cleared his throat, visibly unsettled. "Is this a joke?" the opposing lawyer asked, trying to regain control of the situation. "I'm not lying," Miguel insisted, his voice thick but firm. "She left me when I was a baby. They said she died, but that was a lie." Carolina gripped the arm of the chair, her fingers digging into the leather. Her heart raced unevenly. Logic tried to overpower. Chaos in her mind. It couldn't be true. He was mistaken. He had to be. "Your Honor, if I may clarify," the defense attorney began, but Carolina raised her hand, asking for silence. Her eyes were fixed on that face. Miguel. The name spun in her head like a storm. It was then that she saw it. The necklace. Small, made of tarnished silver, hung around the boy's neck. Her chest tightened to the point that for a second she thought she wouldn't be able to breathe. She remembered that necklace. She remembered the cold touch of the chain between her fingers on the day she had to give it away along with the baby she never held in her arms. The truth struck her stomach. "Miguel," she murmured, almost without voice. Tears welled up in the boy's eyes. He took a step forward, but the officer beside him restrained him. "You knew," his voice was now a whisper, but the impact was deafening. "You abandoned me and went on with your life as if I had never existed." Carolina opened her mouth, but nothing came out. What could she say? That she had no choice, that she thought he would be safe, that she tried to forget. How to justify the unjustifiable? Her body was frozen between duty and instinct, between the judge and the woman who at that moment did not know who she was. "I want to know why," Miguel shouted again, now his voice cracking. "Why did you do this? To me? Why did you leave me to suffer?" Before any answer could be given, the defense attorney stood up, holding an envelope. "Your Honor, I received a document that may clarify this situation." He walked to the bench and extended the envelope to Carolina. Her hands trembled as she picked up the paper. The silence in the room was absolute. Her eyes scanned the surface of the envelope, hesitating before opening it. When she finally did, a piece of the past fell into her fingertips. A photo. A baby wrapped in a blue blanket. And next to it a signature. Her own name. Her blood ran cold. What else had they hidden from her? Carolina felt eyes on her. The entire courtroom awaited a reaction, but everything around her seemed to have fallen silent. The photo in her hands trembled slightly, and she knew that if she tried to speak at that moment, her voice would fail. "Your Honor?" The voice of the judge presiding over the session sounded like a distant echo. She slowly lifted her gaze, once again meeting Miguel's eyes. The boy was still there, motionless, waiting for an explanation she didn't know if she could provide. The necklace sparkled on his neck, a cruel reminder that the past is never buried forever. "We will suspend this session until we can clarify this matter." The judge's voice resonated throughout the courtroom, and a murmur began to fill the space. Miguel was escorted out, but before crossing the door, he turned around one last time. His gaze spoke more than any words. Carolina felt the weight of guilt on her shoulders. How was this possible? How was her son standing there before her, when all she knew was that he had been placed with an adoptive family 9 years ago? She didn't recall signing any document that invalidated the adoption. So, why was her name there? The corridors of the courthouse seemed endless as Carolina walked toward her office. She sat down at her desk, the envelope still tightly clutched in her hands. Her heart raced. She needed answers. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in a long time. The woman on the other end answered in a hesitant tone. "Dr. Carolina?" What a surprise. "Diana, I need to talk to you. Now." Her voice was firm, but laden with urgency. Diana, the social worker responsible for Miguel's adoption process, agreed to meet with her. Less than an hour later, the two sat in a discreet cafe. Carolina wasted no time. "What happened to my son?" The question came out almost as a whisper, but the impact was overwhelming. Diana glanced away, nervously stirring her coffee. "Carolina, you need to understand that certain decisions were made to protect you." "Protect from what?" Carolina leaned forward, anger mixing with anxiety. "I placed my son for a safe adoption. How did he end up in an orphanage again?" Diana sighed, and then revealed what Carolina could never have imagined. The family that adopted Miguel returned him after 2 years. They couldn't handle— She hesitated. "His behavior." Carolina's stomach churned. "Behavior? He was just a baby." Indignation overtook her. "And why was I never informed about this?" "Because someone made sure you never would." Diana lowered her voice, her eyes filled with regret. "Someone signed the papers for you, Carolina. Your signature was forged. The world seemed to spin. Her name on that document. It wasn't hers. Someone deliberately kept her away from Miguel, but who did this?" Her voice was almost a whisper now. Diana swallowed hard. She looked around as if fearing to be overheard. Then she slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Carolina opened it and read the name written there. Her heart stopped. That person should never have been involved in this. This can't be true. Her mind denied it, but her instinct screamed that it was. It was real. She needed to confront the truth. And quickly. If someone had stolen her child from her once, they could try to do it again. Carolina could barely breathe. The name written on that piece of paper was a sharp blade in her mind. It couldn't be. It didn't make sense. But Diana had no reason to lie. The courtroom was her second home. She had always trusted the integrity of the system, the rules, the justice. Now she felt like a fragile piece in a game she never knew she was playing. Her own child had been ripped from her, and she hadn't even had the chance to fight. With clenched fists and a racing heart, she grabbed her phone and dialed a number she had been avoiding for years. The call was answered after the third ring. "Carolina?" The voice was laden with surprise and caution. "I need to speak with you now." Her voice was cold, firm. "About Miguel." A heavy silence fell on the line. Then an almost inaudible reply. "Let's meet in my office. Give me an hour." The call disconnected, leaving Carolina even more unsettled. Her chest burned with a mix of anger and anxiety. She needed answers, and this time she wouldn't leave without them. The courthouse appeared larger and more imposing that night. Each of Carolina's steps echoed through the empty corridors. Judge Antonio Vasconcellos' office was on the top floor. When she reached the dark wooden door, she took a deep breath and knocked. The voice on the other side permitted her entry. Antonio was seated behind an impeccably organized desk. His grey hair and rigid posture gave him an air of unquestionable authority. But Carolina would not be intimidated. "You knew all along," she accused bluntly. Antonio intertwined his fingers and sighed heavily. "If you're here, it's because you've discovered something," he said calmly. "But I need to know how much." Carolina threw the envelope with the forged documents onto the desk. "Everything. I know my signature was forged, that my son was returned as if he were a defective object, and that you have something to do with it." Her eyes sparkled with indignation. "I want the truth. Now." Antonio leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. Then he began to speak, his voice heavy with unexpected weariness. "Carolina, what you don't understand is that some decisions have to be made for the good of all. When you gave Miguel up for adoption, he went to a family that promised to take care of him. But things didn't go as planned. They rejected him, and the system needed to find a quick solution. We couldn't just hand him back to you after so long." She leaned over the table. "Couldn't or didn't want to. Who else was involved?" Antonio hesitated. Then he took a small keychain from his drawer and spun it between his fingers, as if organizing his thoughts. It wasn't just me. Other judges, lawyers, social workers, people who believed they were upholding the system. Your son became a problem, Carolina. And problems need to be eliminated before they cause damage. The anger surged within her. You're telling me a child was treated like a mistake? Like something that needed to be discarded? Her voice wavered with indignation. What I'm saying, he leaned forward, is that everything that was done within the law, even if it wasn't morally acceptable. You, above anyone else, should know how the system works. Carolina felt a wave of disgust wash over her. She had always believed in justice, but now realized that this same justice had been used against her and Miguel. Where has he been all this time? Her voice came out weaker than she wished. Antonio took a deep breath. In shelters, temporary homes, institutions that don't appear in official records, when a child doesn't fit the mold they expect, the system pushes them into places where no one asks too many questions. That's what happened to Miguel. Carolina closed her eyes for a moment, trying to hold back tears. Her son suffered alone while she went on with her life believing he was safe. Do you have any idea what you did to him? She whispered, pain overflowing from each word. Antonio didn't answer. His silence was response enough. She stood up. This isn't over. She picked up the documents and put them in her bag. I will clean up this mess, and I will protect Miguel no matter the cost. She turned to leave, but Antonio called her back. Carolina, be careful with the enemies you're making. Some people won't want this truth to come out. She didn't respond. She just walked out, letting the door close behind her. But inside her chest a conviction grew. She wouldn't rest until she brought justice for her son, and for all the other children the system tried to erase. The silence of the courtroom still echoed in Carolina's mind. Every word spoken by Antonio was etched in her memory like an open wound. Your son had been treated as a problem, a burden to be discarded. But now she had no more doubts. Miguel was her priority, and above all needed to be protected. Sitting in her car, Carolina was examining the documents she had taken from Antonio's office. Each page told a story of omission, manipulation of the system, and destroyed lives. It wasn't just Miguel. There were other names, other children who had been erased, thrown into a bureaucratic limbo where no one looked for them anymore. The phone vibrated in her pocket. Seeing the name on the screen made her stomach churn. Diana, what's going on? Carolina. The social worker's voice was trembling. You need to come here. Miguel is missing. The world seemed to spin around her. Her body tensed. Her heart raced. What do you mean, missing? Her voice came out sharp, a mix of despair and disbelief. He was at the shelter this morning, but when we went to find him, he simply wasn't there anymore. No camera recorded his departure. No one knows where he went. Carolina was already starting the car before Diana finished speaking. Fear gnawed at her. Miguel was vulnerable, and now he was gone. If someone wanted to ensure that the truth remained buried, removing Miguel from the picture was the simplest solution. Upon arriving at the shelter, Carolina was met with tense gazes. Diana was waiting for her at the entrance, her eyes watery and her face pale. The director wants to speak with you, she said. Carolina entered without hesitation. The office was small, cluttered with papers and worn-out folders. The director, a grey-haired man with a tired expression, seemed hesitant to meet her gaze. How did this happen? Carolina demanded. The man cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. This has never happened before. Our security protocols are strict, but Miguel is not here and we don't know how he got out. Carolina took a deep breath. She needed to stay calm, think rationally. Did anyone come looking for him in the past few days? Any strange activity? The director hesitated before answering. Yes, a man showed up here 2 days ago. He said he was the lawyer for Miguel's biological family and wanted information. He said he wanted to regularize the boy's situation. Carolina felt her blood run cold. Do you have his name? The director opened a drawer and pulled out a handwritten form. Carolina took the paper, and her breath caught in her throat as she read the name signed there. It was someone she knew, someone who shouldn't be involved in this. Diana was driving while Carolina typed feverishly on her phone. She needed to find Miguel before it was too late. The name on the paper haunted her, overturning everything she thought she knew about this conspiracy. "Do you think he was taken forcibly?" Diana asked, her eyes glued to the road. "I don't know," Carolina admitted, "but I know. He is in danger, and I won't stop until I find him." The phone vibrated. An anonymous message appeared on the screen. Just one sentence. "If you keep digging, you might not like what you find." Carolina felt a chill run down her spine. Someone wanted her to stop. But that only confirmed what she already knew. She was on the right track. "Diana, step on it. We don't have time to waste." The car's headlights illuminated the dark road as Carolina prepared to face the worst. Her son was out there, and she would do anything to bring him back. The darkness of the road seemed to stretch infinitely before Carolina. Her heart pounded against her chest as she tried to remain calm. Miguel was missing, and every passing minute intensified her anguish. The anonymous message still glowed on her phone screen, a warning that she was going too far. Diana drove with her eyes fixed on the road, but the tension in the air was palpable. The silence between them was broken when Carolina spoke. "We need to find out who is behind this. That name on the document," she pressed the paper against her chest. "He has always been involved in sensitive cases, but I never imagined it would come to this." Diana gave her a worried look. "Do you think he is directly involved in Miguel's disappearance? If he's not, he knows who is." "Carolina," replied, her voice filled with determination. "And I won't rest until I find him." Carolina's phone vibrated again. Another message, just an address and one word. "Come alone." Diana looked at her, alarmed. "You can't go alone. This could be a trap." "I know," Carolina said, her eyes firm. "But if there's a chance to find Miguel, I can't ignore it." The location indicated in the message was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Carolina parked the car a few blocks away and walked cautiously, feeling every muscle in her body tense. The cold wind cut against her skin, and every sound echoed threateningly in the silent night. As she approached the entrance of the warehouse, a silhouette emerged from the shadows. The man was tall, wearing a dark coat, and keeping his hands in his pockets. "You arrived quickly," he said, his voice low and laced with cynicism. "Where is Miguel?" Carolina demanded bluntly. The man let out a slight laugh and shook his head, always so straightforward. "But you already know this story is bigger than you imagined. You're messing with forces you can't control." "I'm not interested in what I'm messing with. I just want my son back." Her voice trembled with anger. The man sighed as if weighing his next move. Then he gestured for Carolina to follow him. Her instincts screamed not to trust him, but she had no choice. As they entered the warehouse, Carolina saw Miguel. He was sitting in a corner, tied up but unharmed, his wide eyes filled with tears upon seeing her. "Mom!" He tried to run towards her, but the ropes held him back. The sight shattered something within her. Fear gave way to fury. "Release him, now!" Her voice came out lower but full of menace. The man shrugged. "You can take him, but not without a warning. Stop digging. There are people who won't hesitate to go to the end to silence you. You're lucky to still be alive." Carolina moved closer to Miguel, her hands shaking as she untied the ropes. The boy clung to her tightly, sobbing against her chest. "We're getting out of here," she whispered. The man watched her with a cold gaze. "This isn't over, Carolina. If you continue, you're putting his life at risk. Think carefully." She didn't respond. She took Miguel's hand and left the shed, not looking back. But inside her, something had changed. They tried to silence her, tried to erase the truth, but now Carolina had even more reasons to move forward, and she wouldn't stop until she unmasked each of them. Carolina drove with one hand on the wheel and the other holding Miguel's. The boy was exhausted, his eyes swollen from crying, but he clung to his mother fiercely. Fear still loomed over them, but the worst was over. She had found him, he was safe. "It's all okay now," she murmured, glancing at him quickly. "I promise." But the truth was, everything wasn't okay, not yet. The man in the shed had warned her, but Carolina wouldn't be intimidated. After everything, she wouldn't back down. The system that took Miguel from her needed to be exposed. And she knew exactly what to do. The next morning, Carolina went to her office and began gathering all the evidence. Every document, every name, every detail of the scheme that allowed children like Miguel to be erased. Her name was in the midst of it, unbeknownst to her. But now the truth would come to light. She picked up the phone and dialed a number. "I need to talk to you now." Her voice was firm. On the other end, Diana hesitated. "Are you sure about this? You can't turn back once you start." "I have never been more sure in my life." The local newspaper splashed the headline in bold letters the following morning. "Illegal adoption ring, will justice be served?" Carolina's name was everywhere. Interviews, testimonies, investigations being reopened. The system that kept everything hidden was beginning to crumble. The threat loomed over her like a dense cloud, but she wouldn't back down. She had prepared for this. Miguel was her motivation. Nothing else mattered. Meanwhile, Miguel was beginning to adapt to the new reality. He still had nightmares and would take time to fully trust the world, but beside Carolina, he found safety. He was finally home. Months later, Carolina and Miguel were walking in the park, the gentle breeze blowing through the boy's hair as he ran ahead of her, laughing. For the first time, he seemed truly happy. "Mom, catch me," he challenged, giggling. The word caught Carolina by surprise. He had been calling her that for a few weeks, but hearing it amid her son's carefree laughter filled her heart with emotion. She ran after him, scooping him into her arms and spinning him in the air. "Got you!" she exclaimed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Miguel hugged her tightly. "Promise you'll never leave me, okay?" Carolina kissed his forehead and held his little face between her hands. Never. Not for a second. They had been through hell, but now together they were finally free. The past could no longer separate them. From that moment on, they would write a new story, one where love and truth would be unshakable.